She was just a humble maid in the royal mansion. Yet she fantasized daily about becoming the main wife of FuFu-Drama. Unbeknownst to her, FuFu-Drama had already been betrothed to a wealthy heiress. Perhaps it was the maid's devilish figure that captivated FuFu-Drama, so he did not tell Huan that he was getting married next month. Uninformed, Huan had prematurely declared herself the lady of the mansion, not considering other servants. The elders often reminded her to abandon these unrealistic ideas because matching social status has always been the custom. However, Huan would not listen and often fought with other servants over this. By now, Huan had angered everyone, and nearly all were waiting to see her fail. Soon, it was the actual wedding day of FuFu-Drama. When Huan heard the news, she was devastated. She could not believe that FuFu-Drama, who had promised to marry her, would break his word. As FuFu-Drama was about to make a formal proposal, Huan clung desperately to his legs, pleading for him not to abandon her. However, it was futile. FuFu-Drama had the servants restrain Huan while he boarded a boat with 2 boxes of dowry. In the presence of the bride's father, FuFu-Drama and Raya were officially married. Perhaps worried that Huan might disrupt his affairs back home, FuFu-Drama did not bring his bride back immediately, but spent their wedding night at Raya's home. Meanwhile, Huan sat crying in the cattle shed, having wept for a whole day and night, moving even those who had intended to mock her to pity. Soon, FuFu-Drama brought his new wife to his mansion and introduced her to the servants as the true mistress. Raya felt instantly filled with happiness. Just then, Huan suddenly ran over and grabbed FuFu-Drama tightly. Huan told Raya that she was FuFu-Drama's woman. Raya was confused upon hearing this. Seeing Raya's disbelief, Huan immediately called other servants to testify, asking if they had seen her and FuFu-Drama being affectionate in the mansion. The situation became very awkward. Ignoring FuFu-Drama's attempts to stop her, Huan kept verbally attacking Raya with foul language. FuFu-Drama was surprised by Huan's boldness in openly challenging his new wife. He immediately had his men push Huan away. Raya was also shocked that a servant dared challenge her, the mistress, and was so angry she even considered calling off the marriage. FuFu-Drama quickly explained, claiming the servant was mentally unstable and asked Raya not to mind her. He then began to punish Huan. To show magnanimity as the main wife, Raya displayed pity and begged her husband to spare Huan, since she was just an undisciplined servant. Other servants also pleaded with FuFu-Drama on Huan's behalf. FuFu-Drama demanded an apology from Huan to Raya and made her promise to never disrespect Raya again. To avoid further punishment, Huan tearfully agreed. Although he appeared honorable, FuFu-Drama soon secretly asked where Huan was detained and hurried to visit the maid who brought him much joy. Huan was thrilled that FuFu-Drama came to see her in the cell, believing he still loved her. FuFu-Drama told Huan he would soon release her and asked her to wait for him in a pavilion by the pond. Unbeknownst to them, Raya saw everything. Shortly after, the two secretly met at the agreed spot and immediately kissed passionately. Huan asked FuFu-Drama why he suddenly married. FuFu-Drama explained that Raya's father was a very wealthy and influential man. Marrying her was just to advance his career faster. His true love was still Huan. Raya overheard their entire conversation, realizing she was just being used as a stepping stone. In her husband's heart, she ranked lower than a servant. However, she refused to remain silent. She approached them, and even though she caught them in an intimate act, Huan appeared indifferent. To create a harmonious home, FuFu-Drama suggested that Huan and Raya get along peacefully. Huan knew FuFu-Drama married Raya for her family's wealth and power, not for love. Seizing the opportunity, she boldly proposed becoming FuFu-Drama's concubine, claiming this would allow her to serve him better and also take good care of Sister Raya. She assured she would not overstep boundaries. Raya was instantly furious, perhaps having never encountered such shamelessness. She was momentarily speechless. Thinking Raya agreed, Freya Wisut signaled Juan to thank her. Naturally, Raya did not want to refer to a lowly servant as a sister. She forced Freya Wisut to choose. If he chose to marry Juan as a second wife, she would immediately return home and ask her father to annul their marriage. Freya Wisut did not want to lose this wealthy lady. He began to manipulate Raya, claiming his relationship with Juan was purely physical and that his heart belonged only to Raya. Raya knew she had fears about intimacy, having been unable to satisfy her husband since their marriage. She reluctantly agreed to his request. No sooner had Raya agreed than Freya Wisut ran outside to the hay and became intimate with Juan, a scene Raya witnessed in full. Heartbroken but at a loss for a solution, her pain deepened. During the day, Juan brazenly entered Freya Wisut's marital chamber when Raya was absent. Seeing Raya cry daily, people began to sympathize with the wealthy young woman. However, Raya was not willing to let the second wife live comfortably. Realizing she couldn't handle Juan alone, she began reaching out to every servant in the mansion. To win their loyalty, Raya fully utilized her financial advantage. She not only provided mattresses for everyone except Juan, but also gifted the servants various high-quality fabrics. Soon, all the servants were grateful to Raya. Indeed, Raya's monetary strategy proved effective as some servants began to sabotage Juan secretly. One day, an old servant secretly placed steel pins in the mattress. When Juan attempted to be intimate with Freya Wisut again, she was instantly injured by the pins. Hearing the agonizing screams from the room, the servants secretly rejoiced. When Freya Wisut inquired who had placed the pins, everyone claimed to have seen nothing. Clearly, the servants were now aligning with Raya due to the scandalous union of Freya Wisut and Juan, which was despised by all. Raya then plotted to eliminate the second wife. She gifted 2 young and beautiful servants with precious fabrics, and then falsely informed the second wife that these servants might be involved with her husband, Freya Wisut. Upon hearing this, Juan exploded in anger, refusing to allow her husband to take a third wife. Furious, she confronted Elaine and Bonnie, who were admiring the fabrics given by Raya. Seeing the fabrics, Juan mistakenly believed they were gifts from her husband, reinforcing her belief in Raya's claim. Bonnie, feeling harassed, forcefully pushed Juan to the ground. The two then began to fight. Clearly, this was the scenario Raya had hoped for. She pretended to intervene to break up the fight, but in the melee, the combatants accidentally injured Raya. Everyone was so frightened that they immediately knelt down. In ancient times, beating one's master was a punishable offense. Bonnie kept pleading with Raya for mercy. Raya, showing great magnanimity, forgave Bonnie immediately. She then summoned the second wife and others to administer family discipline. First, she harshly scolded Juan, who quickly knelt down, begging for mercy. When she was about to punish Bonnie, she was struck by Bonnie's beautiful appearance. The last time he had seen Bonnie face to face, she was only a 10-year-old child. Now, she had transformed into a graceful young woman resembling Elaine. This spurred Freya Wisut to have inappropriate thoughts, and he began pleading on Bonnie's behalf, asking Raya to forgive the naive girl. He even suggested taking time to examine Bonnie's health, which displeased Raya. Raya had hoped Freya Wisut would confront the second wife, but not only did that fail, it also made him consider taking a third wife. The second wife became even more panicked, as Raya was the legitimate wife from a noble family, while she was a recently elevated maid. If her husband took a third wife, she would likely fall out of favor. So, she sought Raya's advice, unaware she was walking into a trap. Raya told her about a sorcerer who had been selling magical items nearby, claiming they could win back a man's love. Juan believed this, and immediately sought out the sorcerer. Unknown to her, this sorcerer had been bought off by Raya. He deceived Juan and gave her a wooden doll, telling her that hiding it in her hair would keep her husband faithful only to her. Juan felt she had found a treasure and immediately followed the instructions. Upon hearing that Juan was duped, His Majesty instructed his aides to secretly place a book under Juan's bed. Afterwards, they found Elaine and Bonnie and asked them to help clean Juan's room. Due to a deep-seated grudge between Elaine and Bonnie, they began rummaging through Juan's room as soon as they entered. Bonnie quickly found a book under Juan's mattress. Upon opening it, she saw it was full of instructions on casting spells. Distasteful content. FuFu-Drama, being an official, detested such things. When Bonnie handed him the book, Juan hurriedly claimed it was not hers. Raya's aide added fuel to the fire, claiming he had seen Juan bargaining with a sorcerer a few days earlier. He then shook Juan's head, causing the hidden object in her hair to fall to the ground. With both physical evidence and a witness, Juan could no longer deny it. Furious, FuFu-Drama turned and walked away. Raya quickly approached, demanding to know how FuFu-Drama would handle Juan since such items could bring misfortune to the household. She argued that only by expelling Juan could the family live peacefully. Unexpectedly, FuFu-Drama mentioned that it was a critical time for him and Juan to have children. If she were expelled, who would bear his children? However, he did not dismiss the idea completely. He proposed a condition to Raya. If she agreed to let him marry a third wife, he would consider expelling Juan. Juan was infuriated, realizing she had married a fickle man. Frustrated, Raya decided to go home and seek justice from her father. Unexpectedly, FuFu-Drama did not stop her and even arranged a boat for her. Hearing that her departure was due to her husband's bias toward Bonnie, Juan confronted him. At that time, an annoyed FuFu-Drama, who was drinking with a friend, sent Juan back to live in the servants' quarters. When a drunk FuFu-Drama returned to his room, he found Bonnie's sister Elaine tidying up. Mistaking her for Bonnie, whom he had been longing for, he kissed Elaine on the face. He realized it was Elaine who had been with him, and he left embarrassed. Elaine hugged her sister and cried, ashamed to show her face. Bonnie, unprepared, advised her sister to keep quiet about the incident, thinking no one would know since FuFu-Drama would be unlikely to tell anyone. Soon after, Elaine began to vomit frequently. Bonnie realized her sister was probably pregnant with FuFu-Drama's child. As they were unsure how to approach FuFu-Drama, Raya unexpectedly returned home. Upon entering, she revealed shocking news that nearly made FuFu-Drama cry. He embraced Raya tightly, relieved that his estate would have an heir. Juan, hearing this news, was stunned and collapsed, nearly breaking down. As the wife of noble birth, her only chance to compete for her husband's favor was to bear him a son quickly. Unfortunately, Juan's body was not cooperating. Seeing her husband's daily affection toward Raya infuriated her. Just as she was about to vent her anger on the other servants, she heard even more shocking news. Elaine was also pregnant with the master's child. This meant Elaine's status would soon surpass her own. Juan's long-suppressed anger erupted at that moment, and she unleashed her fury on Elaine. Luckily, other servants pulled her away, but Juan was relentless. She was convinced Elaine had resorted to dishonorable means to win the master's favor and verbally abused her, even threatening to get rid of her. Later, Juan confronted FuFu-Drama, accusing him of breaking his promise not to marry other women, especially since Elaine was now pregnant. At that moment, FuFu-Drama was with Raya, who was as shocked as Juan and burst into tears by the bed. Although FuFu-Drama was secretly thrilled, he dared not show it, fearing Raya's emotional turmoil could harm the unborn child. He continually comforted Raya, emphasizing that her status as the primary wife was unshakable. When FuFu-Drama finally went to visit Elaine, before he could speak to her, a servant rushed to inform him that Raya had an accident. He found Raya sitting on the ground with heavy bleeding. He quickly summoned a doctor to examine her. Using her nervousness as an excuse, Raya pushed FuFu-Drama out. As soon as he left, Raya acted as if nothing had happened. It turned out Raya was not pregnant after all. She had conspired with the doctor to deceive FuFu-Drama. Unexpectedly, her fake pregnancy to gain favor clashed with Elaine's real pregnancy. Raya felt there was no longer any need to pretend. However, to torment Freya Wisut, she paid the doctor a bribe to keep quiet and continue deceiving her husband, claiming her miscarriage was due to extreme emotional distress. The doctor relayed Raya's words exactly to Freya Wisut. Hearing that his actions had caused the tragedy, Freya Wisut felt very guilty and sat outside the house, quietly crying. Unaware of the truth, Juan was unusually happy, listened to Juan's endless nonsense, becoming so annoyed that he told her to go away. Raya, wanting to show the magnanimity of a primary wife, still hypocritically visited Elaine, advising her to take care of herself to avoid the tragedy that befell her. However, she then manipulated Juan, telling her that their husband now only cared about Elaine, and that once Elaine had her child, even Raya's position would be at risk, let alone Juan's, who was a servant by origin. Juan found Raya's concerns very reasonable, and harshly declared that she would not let Elaine's child be born successfully. Taking advantage of her husband's business trip, Juan again caused trouble for Elaine. Raya saw everything and secretly rejoiced. Then Juan pushed Elaine to the ground, clearly intent on causing a miscarriage. Despite efforts, no one could pull Juan away from Elaine. Unexpectedly, Freya Wisut returned early, immediately rushed to protect Elaine, and after ensuring she was unharmed, he warned Juan that if she dared harm Elaine again, he would send her to prison. After speaking, he ordered the servants to punish Juan according to the household rules. At that time, the naive Juan still hoped Raya would plead for her. Unexpectedly, Raya ignored her and went straight to Elaine, comforting her like a caring sister. Soon, the servants threw out Juan's personal belongings because Freya Wisut had decided to move Juan to a grass hut outside the palace, a place usually reserved for beggars. This indicated Juan was close to being expelled from the palace. In the quiet of the night, Juan reflected on Raya's past behavior and the series of tragic events that had befallen her. She suddenly realized that Raya was the most deceitful and poisonous person. Her current plight was entirely Raya's doing. At that moment, Juan intensely regretted her blind obedience to Raya. Soon, Juan went to apologize to Elaine, confessing that her previous actions were due to being misled. Seeing that they were both servants, she hoped Elaine could forgive her. Elaine was moved by Juan's heartfelt words, and they embraced tightly. However, Raya saw everything and could not allow her two enemies to bond like sisters. Considering Juan's limited intelligence, Raya decided to continue targeting her. The next morning, she visited Juan's place, first expressing sympathy and hoping Juan wouldn't misunderstand her intentions. By then, Juan was wary and largely ignored Raya's pleasantries. Then Raya offered Juan some money to buy necessities. This time, Juan did not refuse, as she was penniless and desperate. No sooner had Raya returned to the mansion than she falsely claimed to Freya Wisut that Juan had stolen her money. Thus, Freya Wisut ordered all the servants to search Juan's residence. Since Juan had already angered many, the servants searched very thoroughly and soon found silver in her luggage. Freya Wisut asked Raya if it was her lost silver, and Raya immediately admitted it. This infuriated Juan, who saw it as clear sabotage by Raya, and confronted her physically, calling her a hypocrite and a villain. Unable to tolerate her behavior any longer, Freya Wisut knocked Juan unconscious with a powerful blow. Still unsatisfied, he instructed the servants to stay by Juan and beat her upon waking. Thus, Juan spent the night unconscious under a tree. The next morning, the servants reported to Freya Wisut that Juan had gone mad. When he arrived, he saw Juan with dark circles under her eyes, speaking incomprehensibly. Elaine, witnessing Juan's pitiful state, felt a sudden guilt, blaming herself for Juan's condition. Raya, on the other hand, was secretly pleased, believing this mad woman would no longer be in the mansion and that she had eliminated a rival. With Juan gone, Freya Wisut began to flirt with Bonnie, as Elaine had just become pregnant and he felt lonely. He set his sights on Bonnie, especially because she and Elaine were sisters, convinced that Bonnie would soon bear his child like her sister had. At mealtimes, he made a point of having Bonnie and his other wives dine together. Bonnie, realizing Freya Wisut's intentions, was reluctant to serve the same man as her sister. More importantly, Bonnie already had someone she loved, Jimmy. Not knowing how to refuse Freya Wisut, Bonnie asked Jimmy for help. Freya Wisut saw their intimate moments, which fueled his desire to possess her. He then asked his chief wife, Raya, to find a way to secure Bonnie for him at all costs. Raya was nearly devastated and reminded him that when they married, he promised there would be no other woman. Yet within 2 months, he had taken 2 more wives and was now planning to marry a 4th, even asking her to help. Freya Wisut insisted that no matter how many women he had, Raya's place could not be shaken. Tired of his excuses, Raya refused to help this time. Freya Wisut harshly warned that if Raya did not help him get Bonnie, she might not remain the lady of the house. An old servant suggested Raya consider divorce, but she did not want to leave as a loser. Even though she no longer loved Freya Wisut, she wouldn't let another woman take her man easily. So the cunning Raya devised a sinister plan. One day, Raya approached Freya Wisut, offering to help him with Bonnie. All he needed to do was come to her room at 8 p.m. That evening, Raya pretended to be ill and asked Elaine to stay with her overnight. However, since Elaine was pregnant and needed rest, Raya asked her to send Bonnie instead. Elaine, unaware of the trap, relayed Raya's request to Bonnie. When Bonnie arrived with medicine, she found Raya covered entirely by a blanket on the bed. As Bonnie called out Raya's name by the bedside, a hand suddenly reached out from under the blanket and grabbed her. The person in bed turned out to be Freya Wisut. Bonnie realized she had been tricked, but it was too late. Clearly, Freya Wisut was determined to have her. Raya, listening from outside, felt tormented, but devised this plan to turn Elaine and Bonnie against each other. The next morning, as Bonnie fled the room in disarray, Raya accidentally met her and acted casually, asking Bonnie what had happened and why she was in her room. Bonnie quickly explained that Elaine had told her Mrs. Raya was ill and needed medicine. Raya, acting the part of an innocent, claimed she was never sick and had not asked anyone for medicine. It was clear Elaine was not telling the truth. Seeing Bonnie did not question her, Raya continued her deceit, suggesting she guessed Elaine's intention was to help Freya Wisut get Bonnie to secure the status of Elaine and her unborn child. Bonnie recalled Elaine had recently expressed concerns about the child's status after birth, making Raya's guess seem logical. Bonnie realized her own sister might sacrifice her to please Freya Wisut, an act so cruel it shocked her. Blinded by rage, Bonnie confronted pregnant Elaine, asking why she would do such a thing. As the sisters turned against each other, Raya watched with delight. Even their mother's attempts to calm Bonnie were futile. When Elaine tried to explain she was following Raya's instructions to deliver the medicine, Raya appeared and denied ever giving such orders. Due to Raya's reputation for kindness, everyone believed her over Elaine, making Elaine the target of blame. In public, Bonnie declared she would sever ties with Elaine. After everyone left, Elaine confronted Raya, who dropped her facade and menacingly warned that this was just the beginning, promising Elaine a fate as grim as Juan's. Elaine, lacking Raya's acting skills, became visibly distracted during a meal with Raya and Freya Wisut. When Freya Wisut inquired what was wrong, Raya twisted the truth again, claiming she saw Bonnie attacking Elaine out of jealousy for being pregnant with Freya Wisut's child, almost causing a miscarriage. Elaine countered that it was just a minor misunderstanding between the sisters, not as sinister as Raya described. This time, Freya Wisut seemed skeptical of Raya's words and immediately stood up to question Bonnie, causing Raya to feel a sense of defeat. Elaine, seeing this, smugly predicted that one day everyone would see Raya's true, deceitful nature. Angered, Raya grabbed Elaine's hair violently. Then, Raya went to a stone pillar and injured herself. Elaine was stunned by such an explosive act. When her husband arrived, Raya played the victim, supported by servants who exaggerated, claiming Raya was injured by Elaine. Elaine denied the accusations, but Raya, showcasing her storytelling skills, claimed Elaine attacked her because Raya had helped her husband secure Bonnie. Elaine was speechless, unable to counter such a convincing story. Soon, Bonnie arrived, and since Raya had already driven a wedge between the sisters, Bonnie sided with Raya, believing Elaine caused Raya's injuries. However, considering Elaine's pregnancy, FuFu-Drama refrained from punishing her. Distressed, Elaine confided in Jimmy. Unfortunately, Bonnie witnessed their intimate interaction and realized Elaine had sacrificed her to secure her own lover, a betrayal too complex for an 18-year-old to handle. Realizing her tolerance only led to Raya's further encroachment, Elaine declared war on Raya, stating she would no longer respect her, and they were now mortal enemies. Caught off guard by Elaine's aggressive stance, Raya was unprepared for her next move. That evening, Elaine provocatively told Raya that she would pretend to be unwell to have FuFu-Drama stay overnight with her, knowing it was Raya's turn to serve him. Without hesitation, FuFu-Drama decided to sleep in Elaine's room upon hearing of her discomfort. Elaine then revealed to Raya that she had meticulously planned this to drive a wedge between them. Actually, it was a failure because soon, the younger sister might also become pregnant with FuFu-Drama's child. This would divide Raya's time with Bonnie, and since both sisters are young, they would eventually reconcile. By then, Raya's hypocritical nature would be completely exposed. As an older woman who fails to bear children, she might be driven out of the palace. These heart-piercing words instantly broke Raya's defense. Back in her room, Raya felt an unprecedented sense of defeat. She hadn't expected to be outmaneuvered by a servant. However, just when Raya seemed to have no way out, a tragedy that was very advantageous to her occurred. Elaine and Bonnie's mother fell asleep while bathing by the river, and their father, in his haste to save her, accidentally slipped and fatally hit his head on a stone platform. This caused Elaine and Bonnie to lose their parents overnight. Bonnie, overwhelmed with grief and guilt, blamed herself since she usually took care of her parents. She believed it was because Elaine manipulated her into being with FuFu-Drama, preventing her from caring for her parents, and thus attributed their deaths to Elaine. This worsened the already strained relationship between the sisters. Since their parents' death, Bonnie refused to sit at the same table as Elaine for meals. One day, Elaine quietly approached Bonnie from behind, trying to comfort her sister and mend their relationship. Raya, acting as the palace's overseer, immediately captured this scene. Hiding behind them as usual, Raya watched as Bonnie reacted to Elaine's presence as if she were seeing the murderer of their parents, blaming the deaths entirely on Elaine. Elaine tried to explain, but Bonnie wouldn't listen and kept attacking her sister, much to Raya's delight from a distance. It seemed she didn't need to intervene, as Bonnie could handle this thorn in her side herself. Suddenly, Jimmy heard the commotion and quickly separated Bonnie, saving Elaine from further trouble. Jimmy, not wanting to see the sisters harm each other, especially since he deeply loved Bonnie, told her that it was all Raya's conspiracy and that Elaine was innocent. However, Bonnie had already lost her rationality and believed that Jimmy and her sister were secretly in a relationship, deceiving her in a coordinated fashion. In a cruel attempt to retaliate against her sister, Bonnie harshly declared that from that day on, she would no longer resist FuFu-Drama's affections for her. She planned to officially become FuFu-Drama's fourth wife. She aimed to be FuFu-Drama's favorite woman, to completely overshadow her sister, and also to formally part ways with her former lover, Jimmy. True to her word, Bonnie soon became pregnant with FuFu-Drama's child. FuFu-Drama did not expect that both sisters from the twin pair were prone to easy pregnancies. The older sister had just become pregnant when the younger sister also conceived. However, Raya, being the chief wife, could not accept her husband's double joy. She failed to achieve what the two servants managed on their first attempt. Thus, the wealthy heiress, felt an unprecedented sense of defeat. To maintain her status as the chief wife, Raya quickly harbored murderous intentions. She took a large packet of powder from her storage box and told the servants to find an opportunity to mix it into the sisters' chicken soup. She would not allow anyone to have a smooth childbirth. To create an opportunity for the servants to administer the poison, Raya intentionally asked Elaine to prepare some food for pregnant Bonnie. Due to Raya's instigations, the sisters had turned against each other, so Bonnie had no trust in her sister. Seeing her sister head to the kitchen, she quickly followed. Raya, seeing this, was secretly pleased and signaled to the servants. The scene shifted, and Bonnie, seeing her sister preparing food, declared she would not eat anything made by her from then on. This deeply upset Elaine, who hurried after her sister, while Raya's servant took the chance to pour the packet of powder into their chicken soup, unbeknownst to the pregnant sisters. Elaine continued to explain, denying anything happened between her and Bonnie's love interest. To mend their sisterly bond, the heavily pregnant Elaine knelt before her sister. The image of her sister in her lover's arms haunted her, leading Bonnie to firmly believe her sister had betrayed her. She told her sister she would never forgive her. However, just as the servant reported to Raya that they had successfully poisoned Elaine and Bonnie's chicken soup, consequently, the master decided to leave the remaining soup for newly pregnant Bonnie, who, thinking the soup was made by Raya's servant, drank it without any suspicion. Raya watched this with a slight disappointment. The chicken soup was prepared for 2 pregnant women. That night, Bonnie suddenly felt severe abdominal pain. Fraya-Wisut got up and was shocked to find a large blood stain on the bedsheet. He sensed something was terribly wrong and urgently sent for a doctor. The diagnosis revealed that Bonnie was not in life-threatening danger, but she had lost her baby. The 18-year-old Bonnie was not prepared for this loss and repeatedly asked Fraya-Wisut if her child was still alive. Upon hearing the negative answer, Bonnie felt her world had collapsed. Meanwhile, Raya, the perpetrator behind the scenes, hypocritically inquired about the cause of the incident. Fraya-Wisut explained that the doctor concluded it was food poisoning that caused the miscarriage. Raya then provocatively questioned the servants about the ingredients used in the chicken soup. She added that she saw Elaine pouring a packet of powder into the soup. Bonnie exploded in anger, convinced that her sister was responsible for her loss. When she confronted Elaine, she found her confiding in Jimmy, asking for his help to mend their sisterly bond. To Bonnie, this scene confirmed her suspicions, and she irrationally tried to attack her sister. During the struggle, Jimmy accidentally pushed Bonnie to the ground, unaware that she had just miscarried. Fraya-Wisut witnessed this, and furious that Jimmy dared to harm his woman, punched him. Jimmy quickly explained he was protecting pregnant Elaine. Raya seized the moment to stir trouble, questioning Jimmy's concern for the child in Elaine's womb, insinuating a possible blood relation. This question immediately made Fraya-Wisut suspicious. He had always wondered why Elaine became pregnant after only one encounter with him. It seemed he now had his answer. Jimmy had been helping behind the scenes. This series of blows completely clouded the already not-so-sharp judgment of Fraya-Wisut. He felt that Elaine's character was very poor. Not only did she drug Bonnie to cause a miscarriage, but she also had a dubious relationship with the servants. This made him unsure about the paternity of the child Elaine was carrying. Fraya-Wisut decided to expel Elaine and Jimmy from the house. Elaine realized that Raya was the true mastermind behind the scenes and confronted her about why she targeted Bonnie. Raya did not shy away and admitted that she had intended for both sisters to miscarry, but a twist of fate saved Elaine's child. However, she warned Elaine that this was just the beginning and that she planned to drive Bonnie out of the house soon. After dealing with Juan and Elaine, Raya's only remaining opponent was the innocent Bonnie. Elaine and Jimmy were now living happily together, leading Raya to claim that everything was Elaine's conspiracy. Bonnie secretly visited the house in the countryside and saw Jimmy from afar, taking great care of the pregnant Elaine. This convinced her of Raya's words. Soon, it was time for Elaine's delivery. With the help of kind neighbors, she successfully gave birth to a baby girl. On the day Frya-Wisut was preparing to leave for a trip, he specifically instructed Raya to take good care of Bonnie. Raya agreed readily. Seeing the harmonious relationship between his wife and concubine, Frya-Wisut left with peace of mind. After bidding her husband farewell, Raya did not forget to pinch Bonnie's shoulder hard. At this time, Bonnie did not realize Raya harbored murderous intentions. Due to Bonnie's severe morning sickness, Raya suggested that Elaine, who had just given birth and was more experienced, take care of her. However, Bonnie, still hostile towards her sister, adamantly refused to let Elaine near her. But Elaine, knowing Raya's dark nature, insisted on caring for Bonnie herself. To ease Bonnie's concerns, Raya had her servants monitor Elaine constantly. Bonnie reluctantly agreed. Unbeknownst to Elaine, she was about to be used by Raya as a tool for murder again. Raya then tripped Elaine, causing the scalding soup to spill onto Bonnie. Raya immediately feigned innocence, questioning Elaine's carelessness and whether she realized Bonnie was pregnant. An angry Bonnie concluded that her sister did it on purpose. Raya pretended to break up the fight while gleefully watching the sisters duel, hoping for an accidental miscarriage. Fortunately, Elaine was very restrained and did not harm Bonnie, saving the fetus once again. After Bonnie left, Elaine confronted Raya about her relentless pursuit, asking if causing one miscarriage wasn't enough. Raya fiercely told Elaine that the sisters had stolen her husband and must pay the price.